I'm Kirsten England. I'm the Chief Executive here at the City of York. And I'm going to just introduce the day to you and also our first panel of speakers. First of all, though, can I say that we've already had a test on the fire alarm, so there is no test planned. So if the fire alarm does go off, we need to make our way in an orderly manner out of that exit there. Second thing to say, just a couple of kind of things for you to be aware of. We're very keen to engage across the world in this debate, and to facilitate that, there is a hashtag for today's conference, which is hashtag Fairness York. We're also live streaming the event, the main parts of the event, and we will be filming all parts and make those available subsequently. So just to be aware, that's what we're doing. We're also capturing the debate as we carry on through a board at the back with the story of our conference, which will give us material to draw from as the basis for further publication of our work today ongoing. And do take a look at that through the day. It's a fascinating and different way to try and bring to life debates and the kind of development of ideas and the way that ideas weave themselves together through the process of an event. I'd also like to welcome you to this amazing city, which I have the honour and the privilege to be the Chief Executive of. York is a place which for 2 centuries and more, I would say, has been steeped in debates about social justice and equity, about the creation of prosperity, the debate about who benefits from that prosperity and what our mutual obligations are to one another. There is a continuous line of debate, actually, if you even go back to the medieval guilds, about those matters and how a place can come together to create the kind of place for people to live in. But of course, we're very much known for being the place of the Quaker business community and philanthropists, most notably, of course, the Rowntree's family, who both ran their business here but also took a first deep, passionate interest in the issue of poverty. But actually, in the way that business, civil society and governance have always intertwined themselves in York, of course, the Rowntree and, in fact, many of the other people involved with that business were also councillors and Lord Mayors of the city. And, in fact, some of the first slum clearances took place, of course, in the city of York, and the creation of some of the first model villages along at New Earswick, along with, of course, Saltaire, Port Sunlight, New Lanark, and all the other places in which there are model villages. But there is a continuous debate in this city about these agendas, and most recently, and of course, well, in parenthesis, I say, of course, this university is also in some ways part of that legacy of the Quaker tradition and the civic leadership, because it was very, very dramatically the impact that inequity of income can have on the whole well-being of communities and societies. I'm absolutely delighted that Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson, who are the authors of The Spirit Level, that piece of work from York University, are here with us today, and in fact took part in the Fairness Commission as Fairness Commissioners. So we are also the city which was one of the first group of places create the kind of place we want to live in. Who benefits from the work of this place? What are our obligations to one another? And how does that look in terms of both fiscal and kind of policies around the provision of services within the city? And I'm absolutely delighted that the Archbishop of York, John Sentamu, is with us, who was the patron and sponsor and champion of that work, a formidable contributor. And as were Richard and Kate. Unfortunately, Ruth Redfern, who was to be with us, who chaired and did a lot, I think it's fair to say, John, of the close facilitation is poorly, so can't now come to chair the panel, but want to pay tribute to the work that she did. And there were others, John Lister, Reviva, and John Kennedy from the Joseph Roundtree's Foundation, but a genuinely independent body looking at this place and how we might seek to make it a fair place to live in. But our passion and commitment to the agenda continues and must continue, because despite the fact that we are evidently returned to pre-recession levels of growth and certainly of employment, what we know from recent evidence about our city is that particularly female-headed households are getting poorer, and that there are still 20% of our children living in households that are in poverty. We also know that home ownership and even renting a home is a real challenge in this city. Actually, the period that we've been working, some of our indices of equity have deteriorated. So we have to continue to focus, to address, to develop a rigor of practice which starts to make a difference. Because there is no inevitability. There are evidently places that have made strides, have made progress. And that's, that can be about different national contexts and cultures and fiscal environments and policy, but there is no excuse for us not determining absolutely what we can do in this locality at this moment in time. And we clearly have more to do. It's been 2 years since the communities of York, across the voluntary, the community, the business and the civic leadership sectors came together and were engaged in this process of the Fairness Commission. The work of the York Fairness Commission has provided, I think, a compass for much of the work of the Council since that time. Certainly the debates we've had about wage differentials, about wage levels, about the affordability of housing, and about the obligations that we have to one another have been framed within that very illuminating work that the Fairness Commission did for us. But one of the recommendations, and it was right to come to it now, was that we should seek to continue to develop our thinking and our practice through bringing diverse groups of people together to try and craft ways forward. And this is what we're doing today. There was a very specific recommendation about having a fairness conference that drew speakers from far and wide across our 4 administrations, so England, Wales, Scotland and Ireland, and across Europe and beyond. And I'm delighted to say that we have some very interesting speakers today who in their own ways are seeking to address those issues in their places, in different contexts, and some as academics, some as politicians, some as practitioners, but all have very important things to share with us. And it is in that spirit of learning that we meet together. Many of you in this audience are absolutely in your daily practice seeking to answer these questions. This is absolutely about a conference of equals working together to craft new approaches. So here we are with people from across the UK and beyond, and with a fantastic, I hope that's your experience, a fantastic lineup in terms of people to provoke the debate and different ways in which to engage with the debate. As I've said, this is an urgent and continuing agenda for us, and we need to find new approaches. And it is a moment perhaps for some boldness, and I hope we'll take the opportunity today to be bold about it. This isn't a day for rehearsing kind of shared perceptions and just a kind of a meeting of everybody who thinks the same way. And I'm really delighted that we have people from across the voluntary community, the private, the public, and across the political groupings. Because actually I think it's important to say that all political groupings, major political parties, have a commitment to these agendas. They may express and understand it differently, they may see different policy approaches to it, but actually I think it's really important to hold that. And of course, we've seen today some of the commentary around child poverty in Britain, and some of the comments about what's happening. I think one of the things that we reflect, and I know certainly the Joseph Rowntree Foundation has been saying much about this in the last year, is that it was the case for quite some time that the main policy approach to some of these things was to provide sufficient employment, and that much of the debate has been characterised about routes from benefits and unemployment into employment. And of course, we know now, and we know in the city, that's absolutely critical. It is not sufficient to guarantee the fairness that we seek. And it's why many places and much of the focus is moving to good growth. I'm thinking work going on in the Leeds City region currently that I know around good growth that I think the Joseph Rowntree Foundation is also contributing in. But it is a stark fact that, you know, the number of people living in poverty who are in work is now greater than those who are not in work, and we need urgently to address that issue. And I've said that is our issue in York, where there are deep pockets of deprivation where people continue to be excluded from the labour market, but equally, in a place with unemployment levels at around 1.4%, we have near on functionally full employment, but too many people living in poverty. And I guess I can't kind of open this without reference to the work that is kind of causing a storm and much debate and some controversy at the moment, but is nonetheless a very compelling, and I will admit I haven't read it, I've read many of the summaries of it and will be summer reading, but Thomas Piketty's book on capital in the 21st century. But I think one of the arguments powerfully advanced in there, whatever the debates that carry on about the evidence base, is that as long as the return on capital outstrips the return on growth, inherited wealth will always grow faster than wealth that is earned. And that is producing levels of deepening inequity, which are corrosive, we would say, of the social bonds that actually enable us to function well as communities. And in the UK, there are absolutely evidence of that happening. Just think of the whole landscape around housing, and certainly from, you know, when I grew up and had expectations of moving into my own home, and did so at a relatively early age. I know for our children and many other children and young adults, that's becoming much more of a distant prospect. There is a deep inequity between those on the property ladder with access to capital growth and those who have no hope on the ladder, who are in an increasingly insecure labour market. But whilst Thomas Piketty's work is debated and it's controversial and it's capturing attention, there are persistent, insistent voices which do also receive media attention, which are across a number of very key institutions in our world. And you, I know, are as aware as any of those. So I've been very struck. I listened to all of Christine Lagarde's Dimbleby lecture, but she has now consistently spoken about deepening inequity and inequalities of wealth across the world and the impact on those in her role as head of the IMF. And she has said most recently again, you know, economic and social inclusion must be given as much weight as growth. But not just she with a responsibility for the international monetary system, but Mark Carney, the more recently appointed Governor of the Bank of England, has recently said prosperity requires not just investment in economic capital, but investment in social capital. Turn to John Cridland, the Director General of the CBI, charting what lies ahead for business in 2014, saying low wages are one of the main challenges for business in 2014. And of course, statistics pop up repeatedly, which draw our attention to the fact that all is not as we might have imagined it would be. So, research from the Post Office just 2 weeks ago, which show that this year the richest 20% will save nearly £19,000, but the poorest will spend nearly £2,000 more than they earn. The Office for National Statistics in May show Britain's richest 1% have accumulated as much as 55% of the population. And of course, as we know, and as Christine Lagarde has repeatedly said, you know, the richest 85 people in the world own the same amount of wealth as the bottom half of the world's population. It's imperative, I think we believe in our work here, that we find solutions to that because of its impacts upon the bonds that hold us together, our ability to continue to be prosperous. I think Kate and Richard talked very very emphatically about the psychosocial impact of all of that inequity and inequalities of wealth, and lowered levels of educational attainment, impacts in terms of the life expectancy and involvement in the criminal justice system. They are costs to everybody of that status. It's imperative that we find a way to create growth in which there is due reward for everybody, in which there is sufficiency and decency, and in which our obligations to one another are understood and expressed in our policy and fiscal landscape. And as I say, that is a debate for all parties, and all parties are having. So today, of course, won't be the end of that debate. I've spoken a little bit about the many ways in which we hope to share and draw more people into the debate. And through our web pages and our social media presence, we want to enter into more of the global debates around this agenda. It's not about drawing everybody to the York Fairness Commission, it's about us being in that interconnected debate. But we want to keep that dialogue going between us, other places in the UK, and Europe about the issues of fairness and poverty, and they're not interchangeable, but they're crucial interactions. And we understand that not all the solutions can be the same, that there are absolutely important local contexts which will shape and determine. So, as we will hear today, there are cases where the solutions of York might be quite different to those that are being pursued in Islington or Oldham or Delft or Lisbon, or any of the other places here, Chepstow, who's somebody from the South Wales Fairness Commission here. So lots of different approaches for us to hear and learn from. And I hope we will all take the opportunity to find a voice, to challenge, to debate, to start to see if we can weave together bold approaches which mark our contribution to this debate. So let's make it happen. Thank you very much. And I'd like now to introduce the first of our three speakers for this morning. Probably needs very little introduction, actually. The Archbishop of York. It's all right, I'll probably... It's all right, I am a bit challenged on these things, but that one. I'd like to introduce Dr. John Sentimi, the Archbishop of York, who many of you will know. We've been honoured to have his contribution in the city for some time now, in a myriad of ways, with your work around young people, your support for fostering and adoption, your tireless conversations about what's just and right in our society, and then thank you hugely for being the patron, sponsor, champion of our Fairness Commission. I have a little biog here. I'm actually tempted to allow you to bring that to life as you wish. So without further ado, can we welcome Dr. John Sentimi to the stage?
Carsten, according to the program I've got, this my contribution and Julia's should end at 10:10. Is that true? Is that true?
We're on conference time.
Okay.
So there's about 10 minutes each.
Because I don't want to be accused of being a true African. Because the saying is that in Africa, in Britain, people have got watches and clocks, whereas in Africa, I've got time. And plenty of it. So anyway, I have...
Use it.
Use it, all right. Okay, I just didn't want somebody to say, hey, look at him, he's just going on and on and on. I think I'm delighted to be with you all today, and because we are trying this morning to work together to forward the whole question of fairness. Fairness for all citizens, not just a few. That's what our work is this morning, and if you can come up with some ideas which will help us to do this, it will be quite wonderful. Now, on Thursday of this week, you all know the 2014 Football World Cup kicks off with a group stage match between host Brazil and Croatia. And in this run-up of these games, even those who are not interested in football will have seen pictures of the news about the gorgeous beaches and hotels of Rio, on one hand juxtaposed with the city's notorious slums, the favelas. What a contrast. Wonderful beaches, everything gorgeous. And then side by side, the favelas, really. And within the arms of Christ, of course, wanting to hold them together. You know, that big statue. I just want to hope That will be the citizens of the world. All of our citizens of the world wanting to hold everybody together, not just the rich, but actually everybody being held together. Arms outstretched. That's what, for me, fairness is all about. That our arms are stretched across the divide so that we can find this wonderful way of doing it. Again, those wonderful images of the haves and the have-nots, of the injustice and unfairness which many suffer, while others actually thrive. In the city of York, we should not feel smug because we've got a beautiful city, a city of culture and many excellent facilities, many visitors, many wonderful things happen. Do you know York has been voted the most and best and beautiful place to live in Britain? And you're lucky to just be visiting us. If you don't feel it, well, go and see the city. And by the way, I'm wearing this because it has to do with Tour de France, in case you had not realized that. And it begins in Yorkshire. Then you'll go back to France. And by the way, those who don't think we're in Europe, I don't know what they're talking about. But anyway, that's another story. But those of you who know the part of this wonderful city, nevertheless, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's got everything that really goes on. But nevertheless, not everybody in York, not everybody in the towns, cities, villages, countryside, is living in what I call absolute % fairness. And this is also true across prosperous Europe and the Union, really, for whom the picture is very different, with many of the neighbors experiencing poverty, poor education, unemployment, high crime levels, isolation, and indeed, of course, loneliness, which is one of the greatest difficulty in our cities. And I speak as one person who once was an ambassador for the city of York. And by the way, I was very proud when I was ambassador for the city of York, visit York, the numbers went up by 2 million. So that's good news. So I can speak a bit of pride, but nevertheless, what do you do with unfairness? You've heard from the chief executive cast in England, the Fairness Commission set up again to address what we could do to make life better and fair for all the people of the communities, for all of us. And in order to address the fairness, injustice, and income inequality suffered by so many, it was and is vital actually to ensure that all our citizens are a part of the process, just as everybody needs to be part of the process. Now, as you know, it is no good, for example, tackling the whole question of racism and those who are victims of it not being part of the conversation. And it seems to me that if there's been unfairness, those who experience poverty need actually in the end to be in the driving seat, because they do know what actually is going on and their voices need to be heard. And so the consultation process we had here was very clear. The people of the city was tremendously encouraging in building a real sense of belonging and a desire to ensure that everyone can live a life to the full and have equal access to services, equal involvement in the life of our communities. So I am very proud that we had a Fairness Commission which brought in voices which often are not heard and people who almost are invisible. Not because they're invisible, but because we choose to do so, friends. It's well known that injustice and inequality lead to a sense of alienation, of separation from the rest of society. But through showing active recognition and appreciation of the value of each person, social capital actually is built. We can't stand aloof from the injustice and experience by others and our neighbors. That wonderful poet, John Donne, says it's wonderful, of course you know it. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. Any man's death diminishes me, and I want to add in another line, that injustices suffered by anyone diminishes me, because I'm involved in mankind, and therefore never sent to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. So every time somebody dies, just see a bit of you is gone. And anybody who is experiencing unfairness, some of you is being diminished. We can't be neutral. For as far as Archbishop David Tutu has always got a way of putting things. This is wonderful. He said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen to be on the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse, and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. Friends, that's what is happening with the whole question of fairness. We cannot be neutral. Because if we are, we have decided to be on the side of those who are burdening people with great difficulties. So I see 4 main areas of injustice and inequality in our society which we need to tackle, and I do this because these were tackled in the Fairness Commission in York. First, with health inequality. Now, within almost all British cities, there are differences in the expectancy between the richest and poorest neighbors of anywhere from 5 to 12 years. This is perhaps the biggest human rights abuse in the rich developing societies. Worse perhaps than imprisoning the population of those neighborhoods for a similar time without trial. To me, it's just as bad as that. It's as if you've locked up these people who are experiencing this health inequality in a prison and they've not been given a trial. That's what it's all about. It's not that, a large part of the difference is thought to be due to psychological factors, the quality of social relations, early childhood, social status, a sense of control, etc., which again, working through stress, all have powerful biological effects which look rather like more rapidly actually aging in many ways. As a nation, we need to protect the principles of Bevan that allow each man, woman, and child access to health care wherever they need it. That's what Bevan was about. It wasn't that those who are able could get more access. They should actually have access whenever it is needed. But also we need to work hard to build safe and caring communities in which people can actually flourish. So health inequality and this gap between life expectancy, between rich and poor, the poor as it were, are living in a prison of health without a fair trial. The second area of injustice is child well-being. Sadly for us, it seems like Britain's children do badly compared to those in many other countries. Levels of bullying and child conflict are high. So is childhood obesity, self-harm, drug use, poor family relations, and subjective well-being. In addition, the age of criminal responsibility is low compared to many of our EU counterparts. Now, that's just shocking. Why in England or in Britain do we think the age of responsibility for criminal activity should be lower than in the rest of the European Union? Why? Is it because our kids are more criminally minded? I mean, I just can't get my head around that one anyway. I hope that will become a big election issue in 2015. What can we do to improve the fairness of our society and help our families to our communities who are suffering from deprivation and insecurity to become stable and healthy places where children can actually thrive? Are we a nation where children have lost the whole ability to play and have fun and have wonderful childhood? Now, of course, in education, I know that it's important there should be great education for everybody, but these attainment targets and tables, have they done something awful to children? Because we think they're a machine which could produce wonderful results. And of course, you saw that thing in Korea where kids really hardly sleep. And their results were fantastic. But I wouldn't want to bring my kid in a country like that at all. Never. I'm not a machine. I'm a human person with dignity. Thirdly, youth unemployment. Again, our national level of unemployment among young people aged 16 to 24 years old stands at around still 20%, just over 1 million young people. And it is in the most deprived areas that the majority of these young unemployed people actually are to be found. Studies have shown that unemployment does lasting damage. It's obvious and has consequences for crime and drug abuse. It has led to politicians, of course, and media to observe and talk a lot of a generation that has been lost. When are we going to recover that generation? Finally, the third area of inequality is income inequality. And this, to me, is the biggie, biggie, biggie. Others we can actually address, but this one is a big one. income inequality. Larger income differences seem to make societies more antisocial. By increasing social status differences and social distances, greater inequality increases all the problems associated actually with social status: drugs, violence, poor educational performance, teenage births. Friends, income inequality is really one of those giants that must be slain. Putting in religious terms, is a demon that must be cast out. Greater income inequality has so many damaging effects because it amplifies and strengthens all the ways in which social class imprints itself on us through life. You know, yes, I was a vicar, I wasn't earning a lot, but actually I was getting what do you call a stipend, a living wage. So I was able actually to raise my children in a way that I would. But there were people who were my neighbors. Because of income inequality, on them was imprinted this, and maybe it's just a British thing, this social class thing, absolutely written large. It weakens the bonds of caring, kindness, and trust between us. If we want a happier and less divided society, then an important step forward would be to reduce the scale of income differences between rich and poor. We've really got to do it. That's why, over the past year, I have been pleased to chair the Living Wage Commission, which is urging employers to put a proper value on the work of their workers. You know, what you say sometimes has more meaning than what your intentions may be, actually. If you pay somebody a minimum wage, and next to them somebody is getting huge sums, you're almost saying that person's worth is not all that great, really. That's why we are going for a living wage. The church has been at it, by the way, for a long time. Clergy receive a stipend, which is a living wage. It allows you to get a bit of money to do a bit of God's work. It's not a lot, but it allows you to do something useful. It's well known that you can judge how healthy a society is by how it treats the most vulnerable people. Research has conclusively shown that a more equal society is a happier society. And by the way, when the Spirit Level came out, every politician thought it was the best book ever written. And what have they done about it? Platitudes, platitudes, platitudes. Creating an equal society may require courage from its leaders in order to consider unpopular but well-grounded decisions and have the determination to ensure that those decisions really will make a difference. For us, the people, it will need courage to accept that for some of us, life may have to become a little less comfortable in order for it to be more bearable for others. In England, of course, when it comes to taxation, we all go ballistic. I don't mind my taxes, rather my income being taxed a bit more, if I know those who are living in poverty are going to be raised, if it is going to help this gulf of income inequality. And we need to accept this. It may have to happen. I hope all of you will take the lead on tackling inequality, and that others will follow, so that in each village, each town, each city, each country, and their councils, their businesses, their voluntary organizations, and indeed all of us corporately carry out the work forward. What we must ask is, do we want to live in a society where inequality and suffering is ingrained? That's the question. Or do we rather send out the message that everyone is valued and has an important part to play? Friends, it is our choice. I would rather live in a society where equality and fairness is ingrained, and that the word income differentials really ceases to matter. It is our choice, and all of us can make it happen. So as we saw in this wonderful city, the well-being of all our people, the big one, leader of the council, I'm looking at you, the big one we've got to tackle is income inequality. Because if we do not, we're going to be tinkering still at problems that have been with us for a long time. So I'm sorry, I speak with such passion because I believe it. And it is our duty that the word income inequality like stagecoaches, will become a word. We don't hear it about it anymore. Thank you for listening to this rambling Archbishop.
So far from being rambling, you can see why we were so privileged to have the Archbishop as the chair, as the sponsor of the Fairness Commission. Without further ado, I'd like to move on to welcome Julia Unwin as our next speaker, who again needs very little introduction in the city or indeed across the world. Just returned from a speaking tour in Australia, and as she said, she arrived as the government produced its first budget, which of course would be an interesting moment in the life of that country. But here, as you know, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation has been committed to the eradication of poverty for over 100 years, and both in theory and practice, as it also operates social care and housing services within our city and beyond, which I think gives it a particular cutting edge in terms of looking at how you put things into practice and make a real difference. So please welcome Julia Unwin.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you, Archbishop. Following an Archbishop with a passionate description of issues of inequality and indeed equality is quite a challenge. I'm going to be quite brief because you've got lots of speakers today. I just want to say a little bit about the context into which we're discussing this. My organisation, as Kirsten said, has a long and proud heritage in this city. But this city has a heritage of social justice that goes way beyond that. It starts with the stories in the Retreat, the first mental hospital in Europe where women were kept unchained. It seems to be one of the proudest things that we have in this city. And goes on to the twin heritage that Joseph Rowntree Foundation has got. The heritage of bold, decisive house building that replaced slums in the middle of York, at a time when people thought that was a ridiculous thing to do. Done not by a council, but by a businessman, by somebody deciding that there was a good bit of self-interest in building decent housing for people who could then lead better lives. To this day, we continue that bold heritage and continue to build and manage housing. And a second heritage, which is one of investigation, of rigorous research, of really understanding. Because just as Joseph Rowntree and indeed Seaburn Rowntree counted the numbers of people who are living in poverty, we to this day do the same thing. We do this because we believe that the two things together matter, and that fantastically important speeches change some things, but practice on the ground changes things too. An informed practice based in research and real knowledge is a prize above all else. Today we've heard Alan Milburn reporting from a very sober piece of research that says we are not in this country going to achieve the child poverty targets to which every political party set their name. We've been warning for some time that 2020 looks like a bad year to look forward to. And I think for this conference today, and indeed all the range of organisations, this is quite a wake-up call. We've been on a process that is not going to deliver the sorts of change we'd hoped for. We come out of the worst, longest, deepest recession in any of our lives into a world that looks rather different. It's a world in which work is precarious for some, poorly paid for many, in which there are no ladders anymore between the poorest paid jobs and the better paid jobs, a bifurcated labour market, which our own research suggests, if we continue as we are by 2020, will be an entirely split labour market. The lousy jobs and the lovely jobs, the jobs that nobody wants to do, which are both poorly paid, but also precarious and uncertain, seasonal and chronically part-time, underemployment, that American phrase, now part of our general discussion here about the nature of work. So the nature of work is fundamental to what we're facing in this city and this region. But it's not just work as a route out of poverty. We are also facing an environment in which the costs met by poorer people are spiralling up and up faster than any of us can imagine. We are all paying higher costs for living. We've reported that over the last 3 years, the cost of living for the poorest households has gone up 25%. That's because the costs that have gone up so much are the biggest percentage of poorer households' budgets. The costs of food, of heating, of borrowing, the costs of finance. And we know that if you're poorly paid by the fourth week in every month, you will be borrowing very expensively. That's the only way you can cope. We all know that if you're one of the very many people living below the living wage, the only way you'll cope with a catastrophe like your washing machine breaking is to borrow. So the costs of finance are the third of that part of costs. The costs of housing, because we have so grossly failed to invest in housing in this country, and the costs of childcare. All those costs are going up for the poorest households in this city and indeed in the UK. And this is happening at a time when there are real challenges to government, local governments, regional bodies and to central government, as well as to the rest of us, because our population is also changing so fast. The big thing that we all knew was going to happen, but we've only just woken up to, is the fact there are more of us over 65 than under 16. But even more significant than that, seems to me, the epidemic of mental illness that we're facing across the Western world. The fact that for fantastically good medical reasons, we are not dying so quickly. We are therefore living with longer and more recurring and difficult conditions. People with long-term medical conditions are now living in our community. People with profound disabilities are living independently. Children who would have died in babyhood are now living good, long lives. This is all source for celebration. But just like the challenge of work, the challenge of the changing shape of our population calls us all to a different discussion about fairness, a different discussion about poverty. Because unless we're careful, those very many older people, those very many households led now by single older women will simply be abandoned in the name of autonomy. Those young disabled people who will never be able to work in this turbocharged labour market of ours will be left in deep poverty. Our changing population challenges our discourse about this. And the reason I think this matters so much in a city like York is because we know that cities are the new engines of growth. We know that across the Western world, growth has happened because cities and city regions have made it so. And we know from the last round of big growth that growth can do one of two things. It can gentrify an area and drive out people who are poorer or less able to compete. It can make cities great fun to live in for some people and absolutely desperate, lonely places for others. Or it can be a form of growth that is what's now called in the jargon good growth, the new prosperity that the World Bank is discussing, a form of prosperity which means that whether you're living on the living wage or a bit above it, whether you're disabled so you can't work or living alone and very old, you can share in that prosperity, which is the reason Joseph Rowntree Foundation has invested so heavily in the Leeds City Partnership, because we believe in this region, and perhaps in York above all else, we have an opportunity to show what a good return to growth could be like. Because, of course, growth and proper prosperity is the engine that we need. But bad growth, a rush to prosperity that ignores the poorest, will leave us in a dangerous place. We believe as an organisation that poverty is never cost-free. It's hugely expensive for a city and for a nation. It's hugely risky because it divides us and fractures our social contract. And above all, it is wasteful because what we know about the attainment gap with children that Alan Milburn has highlighted today suggests that we are throwing away the lives of the next generation just when we need their skills, their capabilities most. So for that reason, we were pleased to support the Fairness Commission. We've only supported 2 in the country because we didn't want to spread our UK largesse too wide, but we thought it really mattered in this city in York, with our heritage here, our history of social change, to understand quite precisely what changes could be made in a place like York. Government no longer has all the answers, if it ever did. Local government does not hold all the answers, if it ever did. Nor does business and nor does the charitable sector. Our only chance for change is in that hard, incremental work that will be bold, that will be evidence-based, that can make real and lasting change. Thank you very much and good luck today.
Thank you very much, Julia. And finally, we're going to hear from one of the 2 MPs of York, Hugh Bailey, who's the MP for York Central. Needs no introduction to many of us in the audience, but Hugh, you're very welcome. Welcome to the platform.
It's a really dangerous occupation to be added to a plenary panel that's already running 15 minutes late. I'll try to be brief, but the conference organisers, when I discussed with them what I wanted to say, decided that it probably fitted better in an opening session than in one of the workshops. I look around this room, and I know there are many people from other towns and cities, and to you I say welcome to York, but there are also very many familiar faces who've worked in poverty alleviation at a local level, doing something to boost the incomes of the poor elsewhere in the voluntary sector, providing care services, in academia, people who have spent years looking at these issues and developing policies to confront them from the private sector, from public administration, from politics. I see councillors from all or almost all of the political parties here in York. And my message to all of you is, if you set a very clear agenda, a clear focus on what you intend to achieve here in York, you can make a difference. You are key campaigners in York, and I'm sure those who I don't know from other towns, key campaigners in your own community. To make a difference depends upon the work which you do. Now, fairness in some ways is a slippery concept. It is different from poverty, but I have little time. I've decided I should talk primarily about poverty to draw out some of the lessons I learned as a minister. I was a minister in the Department of Social Security, as it was then called, the minister responsible for income-related benefits, means-tested benefits, focused and targeted on the poor, and on disability benefits at the time that the Labour government decided to set as a key policy goal the reduction of poverty. And I've got three key points I want to make. First of all, that a national government with the right policy can make a significant difference. That national social policy has much more traction, achieves greater change, if it's working in partnership with local agencies, the local authority, the health service at local level, the private sector, the third sector. And that public pressure, campaigning and lobbying can make a difference both nationally and locally. I know this from the time I was a social security minister, because the Archbishop, then the Bishop of Stepney, beat a path to my door on many occasions when we were developing these government policies to reduce the burden of poverty in Britain, with ideas and comments and thoughts. He was one of, I have to say, many people beating a path to the door, but that dialogue between those who at a particular moment in time have the power in government to make a difference, whether at national level, I see the leader of York Council here today, or at local level, get more done when you're in dialogue with civil society, with people who care about these issues, who know about these issues, and have good suggestions to make. Early in 1999, Tony Blair gave a beverage lecture at Toneby Hall and set the goal of eliminating child poverty within a generation. We were immediately tasked to work on this within the Department of Social Security, me particularly with this anti-poverty brief within the department. By the time of the pre-budget statement at the end of the year, we had some flesh to put on the bones. Gordon Brown announced an interim target of halving child poverty by 2010, and we introduced a number of instruments to make a difference. The minimum wage, of course. Now people decry the minimum wage as not going far enough, and I'm a great supporter of the living wage, but at the time it was a highly controversial thing to do. Supported by the Labour Party, opposed by all the other parties as a burden on business that would create mass unemployment. That wasn't the case, and it made a difference. And we bolstered that with tax credits, changing the long-existing family credit into initially the working families tax credit, and then the children's tax credit and the working tax credit, by putting a lot of emphasis, as the present government does, on getting people off welfare and into work through training programs, through building additional jobs. If you don't create more jobs, you don't get people off welfare into work. You simply get one person off welfare into work, and somebody who would otherwise have had that job goes back onto welfare. So job creation is an important part of it. And of course, through benefit increases as well. Our targets for pensioners relied more on benefits, so creation first of a minimum income guarantee, and then pension credit. And these had a significant impact. Between the time that these policies were introduced in the late 90s and 2010, the number of children in poverty in Britain, which had trebled in the previous decade and a half, fell by a third, from 27% of the child population to 18%. Not the half we'd intended, but still there was a very significant reduction. On the relative poverty measure, on the absolute poverty measure, of course, the reduction was a great deal higher. Amongst pensioners, the number of pensioners living in poverty fell from 25% to 17%, a reduction of a third, or 32% as well. There's a significant cost, of course, to the public purse. The cost of the increase in benefits, part of the package for reducing poverty and working age, came to 18 billion a year, and for pensioners, 11 billion a year. Now, there is some continuity of policy with the current coalition government. They maintain the focus on welfare to work. They return the focus on creating jobs and creating growth. But I don't believe all the parties are the same. The trends are, in terms of the numbers in poverty, are moving in the wrong direction. We only have figures so far through to 2012, but they don't look good. And the IFS predicts that by the end of this Parliament, by next year, the increase on the same measure that Labour used of the number of children in poverty will have increased from 18% to 20%. So different policies at the top and different policies pursued locally by local government can make a difference. We found in the work we did that in order to get people without skills skilled up so that they could make a contribution to the labour market depended upon local initiatives provided by local authorities, provided by the third sector, provided by private businesses too. But that policy dialogue between national and local level is a two-way dialogue, as the Joseph Rowntree Foundation shows so very clearly. The sort of housing policy, to use just one example, that they pursue in York gets looked at by policymakers at national level, and if it works, it gets replicated. So that partnership is extremely important. I think I need to bring what I say to an end at this point. I would say there are a few key conclusions I would draw. First of all, although government spending has been cut sharply, and the local authority sees this very, very directly in terms of our ability to provide services, nevertheless, government at national level and local level has enormous resources to devote to reduction in poverty and inequality, and those resources need to be used wisely. Secondly, we need partnerships with the private sector, and it's good to see in York that that's part of the approach of the local authority. Thirdly, we need strong local provision. The local newspaper today started with a headline story about 6,000 people in North Yorkshire relying on food banks. And would we lived in a world that we didn't need food banks? But we do in York, and those, and I see some of them in the audience, who make this provision, it's important that they continue to do so, and that those with the means to do so support what they're doing. Fourthly, we need to campaign for change. And now, in a general election year, we're less than a year away from the general election, is the time to raise these issues and put pressure on political leaders by making this a focus for the general election. I think the very final thing I would say is this. We seem to be slipping and sliding between a discussion about fairness on the one hand and poverty on the other. They are interrelated, but I think the fundamental difference is this age-old debate in social policy between targeting on the poor and universal provision of services. I used to have ferocious arguments with my friend and late colleague in the House of Commons, Malcolm Wicks, a universalist, about this. I wish we had enough largesse within government to provide for everybody, middle class and poor alike. But in a time of limited resources, we've got to concentrate ruthlessly and single-mindedly on lifting out of poverty the poorest of the poor, on targeting our resources where they're needed most. We could reduce inequality quite easily in Britain by reducing significantly the income of the top 10%. And it wouldn't do anything for the poor. They would still earn not enough to meet their daily needs. They would still have children going hungry to school. If we want to make a difference to the greatest unfairness, as the Archbishop said, the unfairness of income inequality, the place to target resources is on the poor. And I hope that that will be pushed very, very hard in this election to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hugh, Julia and John, for tracing the outlines of this very important debate that we are going to pursue together today. I think what we've done is bring all of our minds to focus on the agenda and the imperative of crafting new solutions to it. What I would like to say is the rest of the day needs to be hugely interactive to really glean all of our thinking and start to create these new possibilities. So although you're now going into sessions which have a panel facilitator and speakers, actually the ground rules here is as much debate, challenge, and thinking together as is possible in those sessions. Now, we're going to break in a minute, and there are 3 sessions. One on communities and fairness, which will be in the Lake House room, which is upstairs. No? There's been a change of plan. Well, Phil, do you want to come and explain if you haven't? As I don't know what the change of plan is, do you want to do that?
Sorry, I was going to wrap up. So there's a change of plan in the workshops. So the Good Growth workshop is going to be in the Lakeside room, which is upstairs, and the Communities workshop is going to be in this room. So people who are going to the Communities workshop can stay here. And the Good Growth one, follow me and some other people outside will show you upstairs.
Okay, so without further ado, and do have a great morning. Thank you very much.